The Samsung Galaxy Watch 6 comes in two different sizes. There is this smaller 40mm version and a larger 44mm one. But which size should you get? I got both versions of the active model right here today, and I will be comparing them and show you what they look like on my wrist, and we will also talk about some of the pros and cons to help you decide which size is the best for you. To start, let's quickly compare the prices of the two different sizes. The 40mm version comes in at a price of 320 euros over here in Germany, whereas the 44mm one comes in at a price of 350 euros. So it's actually not such a big price gap between both of them. By the way, I will leave all the purchasing links down below in the description. So first, let's take a look at each watch and how they look off of my wrist. Then we will compare and talk about the major differences, and at the end I will give you my final thoughts on which one is the best for you. So holding right here the two different sizes in my hand, the difference in the size is pretty obvious. The 40mm and the 44mm version have the same height, but all of the other measurements are different. The 44mm version is wider and longer, and you do notice the size difference when you are wearing it. I barely feel the 40mm version when I'm wearing it, whereas the 44mm version is a little bit more noticeable. So if you want to slide it under your sweatshirt, you see quite a difference. Now all the physical buttons on those two watches are the same size, and there's no difference regarding that. In terms of weight, the 40mm version comes in at a weight of 29 grams, whereas the larger 44mm version comes in at 34 grams. Now this is a very small difference, and in the hand or on the wrist you don't feel the difference at all. Before we compare how each model looks like on my wrist, let's take a look at the bands first. So first up, both watches come with a quick release function, which makes it super easy to swap out the bands in a matter of seconds. The bigger difference right here is the size of the band. Both actually have a 20mm strap, but if you compare both of them, you see that one has a longer and one has a much shorter band. By the way, both sizes come in different colors. You can get the smaller 40mm version in the colors black and gold right now, and the larger version comes in the colors of black and silver. So right here I have the 40mm black version, and on my other wrist I have the smaller gold color, even though I would say that this gold has a strong silvery touch to it. So let's talk about the size of each watch. Now just for context, I have a 19cm wrist, which is about 7.5 inches, just to put my wrist into context. If you look at the 44mm version on my wrist, you see that it doesn't fill my whole wrist, and I have some gaps on top and on the lower end. On the 44mm version, I have a lot more space on each side. And for me personally, I would go with the larger 44mm Samsung Galaxy Watch 6. So earlier we talked about the weight, and on the wrist you don't really feel a difference, but what you do feel is the difference in bulk. Now I don't want to say that these watches are actually bulky, but you really feel that the 44mm version is larger, and you get some larger air gaps between your wrist and the watch, and that's right where the strap starts. There's always a pretty stiff element at the beginning of the strap. You also feel the difference when I'm sleeping at night and I'm rolling over to the one side, when I want to put my hand in a pocket, or if it's just shaking someone else's hand. I do feel the 44mm version a lot more in those actions, and the 40mm version is almost non-existent. Now at the end of the day, it comes down to what you really like. I like bigger smartwatches so I can see more on the screen, and navigating on them is easier as well in most cases. You can always go with the smaller version in my opinion. It just looks tiny on some wrists, but going with a bigger one on a too small wrist really looks awkward in my opinion. So if your wrist is similar to mine or anything between 18 and 21 centimeters, I would go with the 44mm version. And if your wrists are smaller, somewhere in the range of 14 to 17 centimeters, I would go with the smaller one. So comparing the displays of those two watches was no surprise. On a whole lot of apps, tabs, and other parts of the watch, you get a lot more information displayed. The biggest difference right here is probably the notifications and messages. So for an example, if you want to look up a Wikipedia article, you get way more text on the 44mm version, and that's the same when you get a text from a friend or an email. There are smaller differences in the weather app. Right here you can actually see parts of the weather from the next day, which you don't see on the smaller version. The overlay of the app menu is almost identical, but if you go into the different settings from here on, you always get a few more informations. Like in your notification settings, you almost see one more line of text. In the sound and vibration settings, you can see parts of the next menu point, which you don't see at all on the smaller one, and so on. There's also quite a significant difference in the App Store. On the 40mm version, you barely see the second app, but on the 44mm version, you see all of it and you see the start of the third app. In your contacts book, you have the same result. The smaller version doesn't even show you the first contact, whereas the 44mm version one, you see the first one. The last one I noticed is the Samsung Global Goals app. Right here you can see the third goal on one and don't see it on the smaller Galaxy Watch 6. Now I pretty much checked all the default apps on these watches, and besides the ones I just mentioned, every app looks the same. I mean, the text and icons are just a little bit smaller due to the smaller display, but you get the same amount of text and informations. Now, at the end of the day, which size should you go for? You have to keep in mind that both watches come with the exact same features, and you're not missing out on anything if you get a smaller or the larger version of the Samsung Galaxy Watch 6. The battery of the 44mm one might be a little bit bigger, but since you have a larger screen, you get around the same battery life. The larger one lasts about 30 hours on normal usage with the always on display mode enabled, and the 40mm one lasts just a couple hours less. But coming back to the size, if your wrist is close to 7 and 8 inches, I would definitely go with the 44mm Galaxy Watch, as this one just looks so much better on a bigger wrist. And if your wrist is smaller, around 14 to 17 centimeters, I would suggest going with the 40mm version of the Samsung Galaxy Watch 6. I hope that video was helpful today. If it was, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more tech reviews. And I guess with that one being said, I will see you in the next one. Peace.